My name is Alison Schneider, and I'm the Education and Training Manager at AgeWell, Canada's technology and aging network. Today's session is a collective of older adult researchers, COAR, Intergenerational Citizen Science in Action. And this is part of our AgeWell series. So as we get started, I want to let you know before we start that we will explore the COAR project, and that is an intergenerational community-based initiative that brought together older adults and graduate students as co-researchers. This project provides lessons on how you can build partnerships, engagement, and intergenerational collaborations in your own researcher work. In this webinar, we'll hear from three speakers, as you'll see. So Pat Scrunton is the coordinator of the Intergenerational National Network in Scotland. Mei-Lan Fang is an assistant professor in urban aging at Simon Fraser University. And Becky White is a PhD candidate in the Department of Gerontology at Simon Fraser University. We're excited to have you all here. So this presentation will last for about 40 minutes or so, and we will have 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A to follow. Please post any questions or comments for the Q&A in the chat or in the Q&A box. You can do this at any time during the session if a question comes up, but we will answer those questions near the end of the session. You can also raise your hand during the Q&A session to ask your question verbally. The raise hand option is on the Zoom toolbar. And when you do that, when we call on you, we'll let you know so that we can unmute you and you can ask your question. You can also enable closed captioning in Zoom, and that's located on the Zoom toolbar as well. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded, and we're excited to have this for a replay on the AgeWell YouTube channel. And we'll send all registrants to this webinar a link to the recording, as well as any resources that we share during the session in a follow-up email. Okay, so that's it for me for now. I will turn things over to May to kick off the presentation. Oh, you're muted, May.
Thanks so much, Alison, and thanks so much, AgeWell, for inviting us to give this webinar. So I'm just going to share my screen. And I will turn off the closed captioning. Okay, so we're just going to get started. This presentation is about co-researching with older adults as a methodology for research, but also thinking about folks out in the AgeWell network and really trying to differentiate co-researching and co-design. So sometimes these terms are used across different disciplines in an interchangeable way. We're going to start off with a bit of concepts and definitions around co-researching, and following that, we will have a short video that I'm going to introduce, which focuses on a big project in the UK called IncludeAge, which uses this methodology throughout the project. And then I'll pass over to Pat, who will share her experience as an older adult co-researcher across two different projects, so one of which is IncludeAge. And then finally, I'll pass off to Becky White, who will be talking about our toolkit, which is called the Collective of Older Adult Researchers. I'll get started here. So what is co-research? It is an inclusive approach to knowledge production that brings community members with lived experience alongside academics as equal partners throughout the research process. So this is a definition by James and Buffel, published in 2022. Now, co-research, from my perspective and throughout different research projects, is part of a broader approach, so a community-based participatory research approach, which is about working with community partners, people who are impacted by the research throughout the entire process. So thinking about ideas design all the way through to developing the proposal, so identifying research aims, objectives, questions, throughout data collection, part of the data analysis, report writing, and throughout dissemination as well. And through doing a lot of community engaged research, I've often found that now CBPR, community engaged research, has become quite a trendy term. The research councils have finally noted that this is an important methodology, and we're going to put out a lot of calls, which requires people to do community engaged research. But is it authentic? Is it genuine? These are the questions that kind of keep me up at night sometimes. And as Pat would call it, it's her bugbears, things that bug her. I don't know what the bear part means, but it's one of my bugbears. So part of this co-researching kind of journey is thinking about how do we authentically and genuinely engage people who live and work in the community throughout the research project? And do they have the training and experience to really actively participate alongside researchers? Which is why, this project around the collective of older adult researchers kind of came about. But also it came about through our Include Age project, which Pat will talk more about. It's a national study in the UK to look for ways to include older adults who are seldom heard or not usually involved throughout the research process. So older people with learning disabilities and older people who are part of the LGBT plus community. So co-research is not without challenges and limitations, and also opportunities. So in terms of strengths, it's a really exciting methodology, and it's very fun because you're working alongside community members as co-investigators, and they bring a lot of really insightful experience and expertise throughout the research. So things that you would not normally consider, because we're not walking in the shoes of these individuals who have challenges that, in their everyday that we've not experienced. Now, there are some limitations, of course, with doing authentic, kind of genuine community-based participatory research. It's very time inclusive, time intensive. It requires a lot of time to prep around proper training. And it's really difficult sometimes to really decide who owns the data, who puts in the resources, um, how do we share the resources, how do we share the information that's produced, the outputs, who owns that kind of information. And if in working with older people, specifically for our research, we seem to learn only after the fact the types of training that's required. So often we think as researchers going in the types of training that perhaps researchers would need, but not thinking about the different experiences of older people, the types of education and training that they've had. Some who are, who have worked in the field are very in tune with research, but some find it quite difficult, especially with that technology piece. So, for example, sending people a link to a PDF file, whilst that might be very intuitive for us, if you don't have the proper updates, if the link doesn't work, or if it downloads into a special magic folder somewhere, then it becomes quite challenging and it really can put people off. So that digital training piece is very important. And of course, ethically, there's that recognition and compensation and the co-authorship. Now, in working with older people, whilst that co-authorship, perhaps might not be as meaningful, it is often great practice to offer that. And you'll notice that once they really get into writing alongside you, it becomes quite rewarding. And a lot of times, when Becky and I have chatted with some of the folks that we've worked with, it's that kind of confidence piece. Oh, I'm not smart enough to co-author. Oh, I can't I'm not a great writer. And, it's just about working with people, letting them know that it's not just focused on the writing, but it's various different ways in which you can contribute to the co-authorship process. Now, the compensation piece is another bugbear, things that kind of keep me up at night sometimes, is that when a lot of researchers do co-research, and perhaps they call it community engaged research, you know, people aren't compensated properly. We're talking about people's time coming out, sharing information, working alongside you. So with our co-research projects, we have attempted to pay people properly, a proper hourly rate if possible. There are different challenges as it relates to the amount of, it could impact people's benefits, and that's something that we've encountered in England, in Scotland, but also in Canada. Um, so there is a limit that, a sort of non taxable limit, or a limit that doesn't impact your current benefits, at about $500 a year. So we can work out how many hours you can get from an individual. But now with some folks, they might be able to work a bit more. So thinking about that more strategically, but also different ways in which you can pay people. Now, sometimes it takes a bit of strategy in working with your institutions. So thinking about, perhaps you have to be out of pocket, um, pay people in cash from your bank account, and then do a claim back through university. Perhaps that's the quickest way that people can get compensated. Now, a lot of folks have used gift cards over the years, and we found that people prefer cash. Um, and it works better for, when you're talking about some people who are low income or in more vulnerable financial situations, having that cash can go a long way, as opposed to being locked into London Drugs, or some other retailer that perhaps they might not typically shop at or have use for. So co-researching with older adults, as emphasized, requires a lot of support planning. It requires quite an extensive evaluation piece as well, because you want to learn what worked and what hasn't worked, and for whom, and what's the context of the situation. And for our project, which is a smaller project funded by the SFU Community Engaged initiative. So this project was a learning piece from the Include Age project, which Pat will talk about. But the goal was to create these research hubs within senior centers. So the senior centers that we've worked with, they are our main community partners. So we're talking about folks from 411 Seniors Service Society out in Vancouver, but also other senior centers that we work closely with, like Silver Harbor Center out in North Vancouver. But one of the challenges can be linking theory towards more kind of sustainable practice when it comes to co-researching, thinking about practical ways in which we can break down theory in order to enhance that ethical working, or enhance more problem solving when working with older people as co-researchers. And we also want to really create a structure for which we can assess kind of the capacity of the people that they're working with, the context, so that the organizations, what resources they have, and thinking about sustainability across that period. Because, you know, a lot of you perhaps have worked with community organizations for a while, and once you change leadership, sometimes things can go differently depending on if that's the priority of this new leader, whether or not they prioritize research. So things can change. So yeah, with this project, I mean, we really wanted to inform future projects when it comes to co-researching with older people, which is why we developed a toolkit. And Becky will talk about the process as well. So for the collective older adult researchers, we work with 411 Senior Center, and that's based out in quite central Vancouver on this area called Mount Pleasant on Fraser Street. And what we did was we worked with about maybe, I would say, between 10 and 15 older adults. Initially, we were aiming for about 20, I believe, but there were some folks who dropped out over a period of time, not because of lack of interest, but they had other priorities, and you'll notice that throughout that if the research or some bits of the research um, aren't aligned with some folks' interests, that they'll prioritize other types of activities. But we really wanted to build capacity among older adults within the senior center kind of sector, and thinking about if we had older adults that were already trained in research, then they can be involved more genuinely throughout research. So not just pulling people from different organizations because they're an older adult, but really have that capacity already built. We wanted to use more participatory and place-based methods. So using walk-alongs, photo voice, story mapping, and thinking about a real kind of case study that the older people from that senior center can take on, which is focused around urban aging, equity, environmental justice. So when working with 411 senior centers, we asked the organization and seniors, what is kind of their key challenge? What type of research would you like to undertake as a pilot, for example, where you go out, you collect the data, we analyze it all together, and we write it up. And they talked about, neighborhood mobility and kind of impairments in and around the neighborhood. So thinking about sidewalks, thinking about bus shelters, thinking about shops that are accessible or not, signage, all of these different things that make the surrounding area of 401 either accessible or inaccessible. And that will link nicely with the Include Age project, as Pat will talk about, because it is about identifying inclusive spaces and places with and for older people. So some of the successes, and these are photos of the actual training workshops. So we were able to engage our partners in the whole design of this research project. It was a smaller pilot project, but they identified the kind of aims, the goals. We worked together to think about accessible methods. They decided on the pilot case study, and it fostered this intergenerational collaboration because we also paired older adults with SFU grad students from urban studies and from the Department of Gerontology to kind of support them through the training process. But it also enabled students who haven't worked with older people to learn about what it is like to work with older people alongside them throughout the co-research process. And it also created opportunities for informal dialogue as well. So building those important relationships. And just a picture there. So Becky and I, beforehand, we went and took pictures of what we thought were perhaps different challenges or different kind of wayfinder, different points of access in and around the senior center. And we focused around, different types of potential themes. So thinking about maybe appearance and maintenance of the community. And we identified these kinds of domains for older adults as they went around the neighborhood to do some neighborhood mapping to think about, accessibility and inclusion. Now, some of the challenges did involve, representation of the co-researchers. For example, are we reaching out to folks who, don't actually come to the senior center, for example, to engage in this process? Managing long-term or short-term expectations. So yeah, we're working with people that perhaps think about, well, what's going to happen? What are you going to use our data for? What's the output? what's happening with the research hub? These are kinds of questions that we were faced with in terms of managing expectations. The sustainability of this initiative post-project. Again, during this project, there was a change um, in leadership. There were some folks that left, and you know, and that changed the sort of dynamic of where this research was going in terms of sustainability. So these are the types of things to kind of think about, and also wider applicability of the core model. So this was a pilot project focused on a specific community and thinking about a very specific case study. What is the wider applicability for maybe folks who are designing age tech, for example? And of course, we've used this model in various other projects as well. So working with older adults to undertake a rapid realist review, thinking about climate justice and the impact of climate change on the everyday realities of older people. So we have implemented the key principles of COAR to other projects. So perhaps that applicability piece is effective, but we are looking to perhaps develop COAR as we learn more about core researching across different challenge areas and topic areas. Okay, so now I'll try and play this quick video about include age,
Okay.
see if it works, and then I'll pass on to Pat. So let me know if you can hear or not hear. So can everyone hear?
There's no sound now.
No, there's no sound. Maybe May, if it's publicly available, we could post it in the chat for people to watch later.
Yes, absolutely. So I did put the Include Age website link in the chat. So the video is right, if you scroll down, it's right on the front page. And so I've paused on Pat. So now we'll pass on to Pat. And Pat, please let me know when you're ready, and I'll switch the slide. I believe you have one slide. So
That's
folks,
fine.
I'll pass on to Pat.
Thanks, May. Okay, so thanks, May. I've been working with May for some time now, so you won't be surprised to hear that I think some of the themes that I'm going to address will be actually quite similar. As you've heard, I coordinate the Intergenerational National Network in Scotland. We bring people together from throughout Scotland and increasingly further afield. So if anybody's interested, our meetings are now almost always hybrid, so anybody's welcome. And we bring people together who have an interest in working across generations, whatever that might look like. Many members of my network are academics, and over the past about 8 years, I think, I've become involved in a number of research projects in a number of different roles. And today I just want to talk about two of those. The University of Stirling runs a long-standing longitudinal study called Haggis. Unfortunately, it currently doesn't have any funding. But Haggis stands for Healthy Aging in Scotland, very apposite acronym. And in 2021, they got funding to do a research study on the impact of COVID on people aged 50 plus and living in Scotland. Once the funding was confirmed, Professor Louise McCabe recruited 7 of us, all aged 50 plus and living in Scotland, as core researchers. It was a really, really positive experience. We received a lot of training, all targeted training in terms of what we were going to be asked to do. And we very soon were working very closely as a team. So 7 co-researchers and 3 academic researchers. As co-researchers, we carried out pretty much all of the interviews, and the interviews could be in person, on the phone, or online, depending on people's preference. And what we did, we carried out the conversation, and then one of the academic researchers would sit beside us. And their only intervention really was if they felt they wanted to unpack something or delve into something more deeply that somebody had said. The beauty of us as co-researchers conducting the conversations was because we were of the same generation and the rapport was immediate, and the conversations were, I think, honestly more open and honest than they would have been with purely an academic researcher. Initially, because we were still in lockdown at that stage, all of our meetings, certainly all the training, was online. But once it was possible, Louise made a real effort to get us together in person as much as she could. And I'll come back to this. But the thing is, when she brought it together in person, she also fed us very well, so we were very well looked after. And I think the other point I want to make about this particular project was, impressively, that project was just a one-year project in 2021 to 2022. And we are still meeting with Louise, all 7 of us. And I think that is to the point how well we were treated. We are still on board and we still meet with Louise almost monthly. And we have tried to get further funding. We haven't got that. But what we do, we are available to get involved in other pieces of work. And just for example, and particularly in this context of technology, on Friday, we are meeting with a PhD candidate who is looking at digital gaming and older people. And we are meeting her as a focus group. So if anybody's interested in that, happy to put you in touch. And the other project, which I hardly need to introduce because May's talked a lot about it, is the Include Age project. And I think it's been really interesting. So we are looking at 2 cohorts. We're looking at the lives of mid to older people who are LGBTQ+, and the lives of people who are mid to older age adults who have learning disabilities. And I think one of the fascinating things to me of these 2 cohorts is that they have a lot in common in terms of potential stigma. But I think in terms of the LGBTQ+ community, you have to think about, they spent a lot of their lives in the closet. They spent a lot of their lives not out as LGBTQ+ people. And in terms of people with learning disabilities, when they were born, nobody dreamt that they would live so long. They had potentially very short lives. So they are 2 really interesting cohorts. At a very early stage in the project, and it was built in from the beginning, we recruited co-researchers who are also members of each of these communities. And they carried out, a bit like the Sterling project, they carried out most of the life course interviews, interviewing people about their lives, particularly how they live in their communities. They did that, and then, as with the Sterling project, which I didn't go into this, but the Sterling project, we continually had the choice of getting involved in something or not. And we all said we did not want to be involved in the quantitative analysis. Thank you much, you get on with that. But we were involved in the qualitative analysis, and our co-researchers in Include Age have very much been strongly involved in the qualitative data analysis. Here again, the point of having people with lived experience doing the interviews, working with people whose lives they in some way share, made a significant difference. And I just think that's something that's really important. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes in conclusion, and to leave you with 3 main reflections, although actually I'll cheat and say 4. I think if you're serious about co-research, it takes time. It's not an instant thing. You need time. Anyway, there's 3 I was originally planning to say. In an ideal world, and May's already mentioned this, co-researchers would be recruited at what I call the twinkle in the eye moment, the moment when you think, I want to do a piece of research about this. That's the moment at which you need to be recruiting your co-researchers so that they are involved literally from day one. The other thing which May also raised was the question of payment. In the COVID study, we were not paid. We were recruited as volunteers. We were very willing volunteers. But as a result of not being paid, well, it was a result of two things. One is not having a lot of time because the funding was in place and it was only a 1-year funding thing. There wasn't a lot of time to recruit. So the other thing is that we were all, the 7 of us are all white. And while 2 of us at least are working class by background, we all now live middle class lives, and we were in a position to donate our time without it being too problematic. That in itself is an issue. The include age researchers were paid, as you've heard. And for me, this raised 2 issues. May's raised the issue of the impact on people's benefits, and that's a really important one that you have to take into account. The other issue was that university HR departments, certainly in the UK, are simply not set up to do this. It's not what they do, and they don't understand it. And that was a real challenge. And the third point I'd like to make, or 4th point now, we need to educate organisations which fund research. If they are serious about wanting to promote co-research, and we hope they are, then I would argue they need to offer some upfront funding. So when you are developing the project, developing the funding bid, it wouldn't cost a huge amount, but a bit of upfront funding, which allows us as co-researchers to be recruited. Now, I know what the argument is against it. That's, oh, well, you recruit people, and if we don't actually get the bid, they're going to be very disappointed. Well, come on, particularly when you're talking about older co-researchers like me. The fact is, we have a lot of experience of being disappointed. We understand being disappointed. Will you get over it? So that should not be a barrier. Anyway, thank you very much, and happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Pat. That was great. So I'm just going to pass on to Becky now to talk a little bit about the toolkit.
Thanks, May. So May mentioned a little bit earlier about the COAR project, which was conducted with 411 Seniors Centre here in Vancouver. And I don't want to repeat too much what May said, but kind of the origins of the toolkit came from the organisation really wanting to position itself as a research hub for research involving older adults and seniors centres. And we initially approached this as a sort of short pilot project, but what became quite apparent through this process is the need for resources to support both researchers and community organisations engage in this type of work. And kind of one of the challenges I find as a PhD candidate trying to navigate the world of co-research is academic papers are all very well, but they don't actually really often provide much insight into the real practicalities of doing this type of work. And that can be really challenging. And of course, each situation you're doing co-research, it's really context dependent, but the need for some sort of resource that guides people through this process, not only from a research perspective, but also for a community organisation, because in this case, the community were like, well, how we really want to do this co-research thing, but how do we go about doing it? And I'll pop the link in the chat, but they wanted to have their own kind of web page as well, and this kind of brings highlights the issue about who owns the data. So we produced this resource with the intention that we would publish it on our website, but we thought it was really important that they wanted to host this particular resource and have it available for other community organisations. So I think that's a really important way of thinking about how these kind of resources are disseminated rather than kind of just from an academic perspective. So this toolkit is essentially a how-to do co-research using the case study of the COAR project. It's a real really a practical resource, and it's intended, as I mentioned, for both academic teams and community organisations. And it's really about making the co-research process accessible and in a language that hopefully people can understand what was done. So I'd encourage you all to go and have a look at it. I don't want to kind of go through a blow-by-blow account of what it includes, but we kind of detail what is co-research and also how we went about doing this project, and importantly our kind of key learnings from that approach, and we come up with kind of a series of recommendations. So how was the content for the COAR toolkit developed? Well, we, as part of this, because it was intended as a pilot process, and we were very clear on that from the start, we had a lot of opportunities for informal dialogue throughout the process, because we really wanted to get both student co-researcher and older adult co-researcher feedback throughout the process. So I'd say that the small group discussions were where the kind of most useful information was generated, and we, May and I were kind of co-facilitating it, and we were able to make notes and feedback, and we had 3 workshops, and we kept sort of feeding back what our learnings were from each workshop, and encouraging dialogue around that. And based on that, we kind of developed this particular toolkit. But one of the challenges to really highlight is it would have been lovely if this toolkit was written by both ourselves and the community organisation, but being really mindful of people's time and capacity. And if we think about co-research, it's really about providing opportunities for people to be involved, as Pat said, from like when it's a twinkle of an idea. But recognising also, Pat, I was very interested in what you said, is like, we don't want to be involved in the quantitative research. And this is what we've found is it's really important to give people the opportunities to be involved throughout, but they don't have to be involved throughout. It has to be guided by the co-researchers. So that's, I just want to sort of highlight that as like the toolkit was that the key ideas were from these discussions and from kind of reflections that we did throughout the project. But it was written by ourselves, and of course they were, the organisation were involved in the review and the sharing of this information. So there are some like kind of practical tools within this particular resource, kind of training slides, prompts, reflection templates, and planning checklists, and kind of more detail about the activity. And it's really, while it's based on the particular project, hopefully it can easily be tailored in accordance with the kind of time, resources, and context that you're working within. So, May, you're able to move on to the next slide. So this was really meant to be a starting point, as May said, and we've gone on to develop kind of COAR through other projects. And from the toolkit, we have been thinking about how do we implement this kind of approach in different contexts. And this is a work in progress, but we are drawing on implementation science approaches to look at how co-research can be implemented in different contexts, and kind of what are the key components that need to be considered at both kind of an individual organizational level and a community level. So we've kind of developed this overall framework, which we hope we're going to continue to develop. So I think that's my that's my kind of spiel, but like, by all means, go and have a look at the toolkit, and we hope it's a useful resource. And I'd also say it's iterative, so any feedback that you have, we'd be super interested in.
Great, thanks so much. Here's our contact information. If you want Pat's contact information, please let us know. We also have a list of useful references and resources at the end of our slide deck, which we'll share with Allison so it can be widely circulated. But happy now to engage in discussion. You can share with us your bugbears as well. Always something quite exciting.
Great, thank you, all 3 of you, for a really great presentation and insights into this process and your experiences with working on projects together. It's great to have a lot of different perspectives at the same table. So thank you for that. At the same table at the same time. So thank you. We do have a question in the Q&A box that I will start with. Okay, so the statement question, the biggest challenges is engagement, especially from underrepresented groups. Can you comment a bit on how you recruited the older adults and what efforts were made to ensure inclusion of those from equity deserving groups?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Becky can speak to this as well, but for the COAR project, I mean, we're talking about a project where we applied for 10,000, we received 4,000. So you can imagine how far that stretched. And actually, Becky worked, not for free, but almost through another project funding pot. So it was really quite limited. But I guess what we have to say about that is that we relied on the organization as the gatekeepers to accessing the members. Now, what the challenging bit is that sometimes you have organizational leaders that will strategically pick seniors that they feel would be a good fit, and that can be really challenging. Ideally, if it could have been posted more widely to all the members, so that we can reach those equity deserving groups, that would be fabulous. And what's interesting is that I presented to 411 months later about the project, and some of the members, so we had maybe about 100, they were like, oh, I didn't hear about it. I wanted to be involved. So there's a lot of kind of negotiation happening, especially if you have gatekeepers. So having that discussion up front to really say, look, we really want to make sure that this opportunity is far reaching and that we are inclusive of people, and people should know about these types of projects. But also another challenge with working with senior centers, for example, is that they have a particular reach as well. So we're talking about people who are able to get out and about into the community, to the senior centers, to actively engage. So one of the things that we are working towards with a senior center is thinking about strategic programming and outreach for folks from diverse backgrounds, people who have challenges getting out, um, and engaging in the activities. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I don't know if Becky or Pat, yeah, Pat's got her hand up, so she's.
Yeah, so I think I'm going back to my first of my what was supposed to be 3 and became 4 points about time. I think the issue is it takes time. If you want to recruit people who aren't the kind of person like me who jump up and down and say yes, please, I think it takes time. I think it's about developing relationships. So it's not an instant thing. You need to go out there and you need to develop relationships, arguably, sometimes with organizations, with individuals. I just think it's about time and willingness, obviously.
Yeah, sorry, can I just build off of what Pat said and what May said? Pat's totally right about the time aspect. I'm just going to use a particular example with the project that we're involved in. As May mentioned, that the organisation wanted to lead the recruitment because the intention was the group of seniors that they recruited, they wanted to be part of kind of a research hub within the organisation that would be trained to help lead on future research projects. And so there were some barriers there, and May said it was a bit of a negotiation. I think there was certainly some learning from our perspective, but one of the important pieces that as I was working within the organization at the time as an embedded researcher, so I developed the relationships with people that may not otherwise have necessarily been the people that were identified by the organization's leadership as being, good for this, but a good fit. We were able to have those conversations like, how about this person, and that person might not necessarily said, I would love to be part of a research project, like, what is research? What does it mean? I had I approached someone that I thought had really great ideas and was perhaps, someone that wouldn't typically participate and they hadn't finished school, etc. And they were like, I'm not clever enough. And I was like, oh, that is not that shouldn't be a barrier, but it was a perceived barrier. And you really have to have those relationships. And yeah, Pat, it's time and, being patient. So yeah, anyway, Pat.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. I think the idea of embedded research is perhaps something that we need to talk about at another time. But I think there's something very powerful about it. I'm currently working with a researcher who is researching into intergenerational hubs, and she is quite firmly embedded in a youth centre in Leith, which is just north of Edinburgh. And I think what she is doing is really, really interesting. So I think this whole question of embedded research is perhaps another conversation for another time.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, it kind of opens up a whole other avenue of discussion. So yeah, we'll come back to that one. There are a couple, so people are upvoting questions in the Q&A. If you haven't opened up that box, you can see some of the questions there. We have a couple of votes for a question that very much ties into what you were just speaking about. What do you think the process should look like for building the relationship and developing that trust from your perspective? So maybe this can first go to Pat, and then May and Becky can add on.
Yeah, I think just developing what we've just been talking about. And I think certainly from a research perspective, the idea of a researcher being embedded somewhere, the relationship just happens, but it doesn't just happen. It also gives you access within an area to other people. So it gives you access not just to the people in the actual organization you're embedded in, but also to the people they know and the people they have contact with. So I think for me, it's all about relationships and building relationships over time.
Yeah, Becky, you can go next if you want, and then I could just add
I was
to.
just nodding wholeheartedly there with Pat because I think that's very much our experience of doing this work in Vancouver with senior centres because we've developed kind of quite a network of relationships, and sometimes some projects are better suited to particular organizations, but it's the oh, have you spoken to X because they're quite connected. And actually I should add then research can also be a vehicle for like strengthening relationships between organizations that might not otherwise connect. And there's huge value both for the organization but also the members really have enjoyed that as well. So yeah, I think also I'd say approaching kind of authentically because rather than being like, oh, there's a funding call, oh, we need to find someone. If you have these relationships already in place and you're just committed to being an authentic, to those building authentic relationships, when the opportunities come, you can work out who's maybe best suited, and you're not, it's not an academic driven exercise then, and you can really listen and understand what the community needs are, and that's just so important to understanding the context. So you have to be like open and authentic and be prepared to put the time in. So yeah, sorry, anyway, I'll no.
Yeah, no, and just to add to that point, I mean, one thing that I would say is that you're never too senior to go out and get your hands dirty. And what I mean by that is in terms of your academic career. Now, I'm considered early career. I'm an assistant professor, but I like going out, being part of the data collection, going out, visiting people, going out, doing the chats, that relationship building. But I do know that for some folks, once you hit that kind of prof level, you're like, oh no, I need to go out and do this type of stuff. I got my researchers, they'll go out, do this. But actually, when we work with executive directors of these organizations, they appreciate you kind of driving out there, having lunch with them, going out,
Absolutely.
having a visit once in a while, because they want to know who are we working with? Who are the people who are kind of leading the project, right? And so I think that's a key thing. And it does take time, as Pat noted, and what Becky is talking about, that relationship building and that kind of authentic working practice is that you're doing community engaged research. So you have to go out and engage with people and it doesn't matter what career stage you're at. Yeah, I think you should go out and meet with people. That's my thoughts.
And I would just say, because I know we have some graduate students here as well, for someone who is completely new, who might just be entering this area of research or developing their interest in working with certain community groups or in certain projects, would you suggest them volunteering? Like, what do you think the easiest way to kind of get started might be for those people?
Yeah, Pat, you were like, yeah, volunteering. I think also just my experience is like many of these organizations have not typically had those relationships with institutions and are generally really pleased when students are interested in what they do and are passionate about the same things they're interested in. So if you see an organization that looks interesting, reach out to them. I would say, in person if possible, but just like often these organizations are really open and they're excited by and you're only asking if you're like, oh, I'd love to come and see what you do, pop your head in. Like, I don't think you'll find there are barriers there. So just, I think, try different things. I don't think also volunteering might seem a bit daunting. You think I can't commit the time, etc. But just, yeah. So anyway, sorry, Pat.
No, I'm just completely agreeing. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would
It's a
also
good way.
say,
It's a really good way in.
yeah, definitely. And I would also say that if you notice some ads going out, some flyers going out where there are projects, we're asking students to come out, support the workshops, get engaged, come join us for the analysis. Yeah, take those opportunities. I know it's a busy time and you might have to trek out, drive out, get the bus out, but actually for the students that were involved from urban studies and gerontology, master's students, PhD students, they found it very valuable. And actually some of the students have continued to work with us in different research projects because of that interest and that relationship that's been built. So
Fantastic. Don't be afraid. I think is one of the stats. Have the confidence. People want you there. Okay, so we have a few more questions. We'll try to hit on these before the end of our session. We just have 5 more minutes. I know you mentioned there were some older adults that weren't interested, say, in the quantitative data analysis side of the research. Were there any other parts of the process that older people did not want to participate in? This is a question.
And from my perspective, no, we were involved in absolutely anything we wanted to be involved in. And we just said no to the quantitative stuff because we didn't find, not that we didn't know it was important. We completely recognized the importance, but we get, no, you're good at that. Just go and do it. We did everything else. And I didn't mention that actually, and May was talking about co-authoring. We have co-authored a paper, which I will share with Alison, about the whole co-research process in the Sterling project. But no, we did everything apart from the numbers stuff.
I guess just to add to that, because we use the co-researching model on a climate action project that's part of our research group. And what's interesting is that, thought it was a great idea to work with older people to undertake a rapid realist review through all the stages. And of course, having done lots of evidence reviews, the most daunting bit, I think, for some people is at the start where you're doing all these searching through databases and trying to figure out what should be included and what shouldn't be included. And to be honest, we didn't provide enough training for that process. So some of the older adults, they were like, oh, we thought it was going to be a 13-week training process. We're like, oh no, we did it in sort of kind of 2 days. And some folks found it daunting. They're like, we don't want to be a part of this piece. We don't want to do all the search. We'd rather read the articles and contribute that way. So that flexibility piece is really key when you're doing co-researching. Or some folks just wanted to do the life course interviews or be part of the dialogue session. So Yeah, I think that's pretty key. I don't know, Becky, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was actually thinking about the core project because it was actually initially intended as a kind of an action research project where we were going to go out and collect the data and then work together to provide a series of recommendations that the organization could own and like try and work with the city to progress. But actually, they weren't so interested in that piece. It was like, oh, that's nice, but that wouldn't be something I would personally do. And actually, I was like, oh, that was a little bit of a surprise for us. So again, like a learning for us about like, being more kind of um, clear at the beginning about who owns the outputs of the research. And I would say there's another challenge that we didn't talk about, but there was a slight disconnect between those actually involved in the research and those from the organisation initiating the project. And so that was probably a bit of a gap there that we, through circumstance and something that we could address in future, but just yeah, that I thought that was interesting because we were like everyone was really excited, but they didn't actually want to personally take forward that work. But it again, yeah, they were more interested in the actual research process.
Yeah, and every group will be different, right? As well. So you have to bring these things forward and ask. You can't make any assumptions, right? That's a big part. Yeah. I think we can fit in one more very short question. So this question is for Pat. What got your attention and made you want to join research projects? What can get people interested?
Well, I think just start. I think it's about one of the words that always comes to me is listening, and I think it's about just make contact. Let's have a conversation.
Great. So some of that genuine way of reaching out one-on-one.
And I'm always happy to talk to anybody about anything. And I think that's where a lot of things start. They just start with conversations.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're just at our very end of our webinar here. So any final comments around the discussion panel here? Maybe Becky, if you want to add a final comment.
Well, I was just like, what's next? One of the questions, I know we don't have time to talk about it, is like, how does this apply in more rural contexts in Canada? And that is definitely something that we has come up through our conversations and we are working on. We recognize the limitations of the particular model we've presented. So I know that's new information, but like the what next? But if anyone is particularly interested, we're always very open to having conversations. But yeah, I'm gonna pass over to Pat because she says everything I want to say much better. So go on.
Pat, any final words?
I think picking up Becky's point, actually, rurality is also a real issue. I know we're a small country, but nonetheless, we also have serious issues about rurality. And I do think that is a really important point. Also, just to say, happy to share my email, happy to talk to anybody.
Thank you. And May?
I guess my final thoughts are around, just sort of, I would say go for your passions when it comes to research and the communities that you want to work with and not follow the kind of the trendy stuff that's coming out just to fit a particular funding opportunity. So yeah, I would say go for your passions, pick the communities, build these relationships that you want to genuinely work with and think about the change that you want to make.
That's very inspirational. Thank you, May. Be the change, right? Be the change. Commit yourself to a lifelong passion, and people will respond. That's what we can hope, right? Okay, so thanks. We're a little over. I'm going to wrap things up. I'd like to thank all three of our presenters for being here and having this important discussion. It continues, and this is just the beginning, but I think the toolkit is a great place to start. If you're not sure where to start, it's always good to have those resources. So thank you so much for sharing that with this webinar as well. We will be having a webinar next week. That'll be the final one of this calendar year, and it's going to be on building climate resistant indoor environments for older adults during extreme heat and wildfire smoke events. I know, May, you mentioned some of the social justice and environmental justice aspects here, so I think there'll be some connectors as far as your research goes as well. I hope to see everyone there. Thank you so much for participating. Oh, yes, May. Oh,
I clicked the wrong thing. I was trying to do like something fancy, with
oh
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
emojis, but it wasn't there.
That's all good. Now we know. Now we know. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Lovely to see you
Thanks,
all.
Alison.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.